let's talk to John. John is a theist from Louisiana who called last week and didn't get a chance to chat because I think we wanted to dive into this a little bit more.
Yes.
John, you want to talk about separation of church and state, and we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm a believer, and but here recently, I somehow or another got tied in with a group of atheists, and on Sunday morning, I hang out with these guys, and it seems to me like the only real gap between us is if we had a strict separation of church and state, we could probably get along pretty good, because otherwise we're just people talking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that if you are hanging out with a group of atheists and their problems are not the fact that you're a believer, but rather the fact that a particular religion is infringing on their rights, and we got rid of that problem, yeah, you guys would be probably a lot easier to just, everybody would be able to get along a lot better.
Oh, absolutely. John, there are so many Christians that I get along with better than other atheists, because just because we have, different answers on the God claim doesn't mean that we have the same answers on, how to treat other humans. So if you and I are humanists, if we care about the well-being and the growth of other people around us, we're going to get together. We're going to be a whole lot better friends than maybe another atheist who is not a humanist. So yeah, absolutely.
Which brings me to my other question or other concern is with the people that claim to worship the Constitution so much in this country. Why are they having such a difficult time with the separation of church and state? I understand that a lot of it is just tradition. They're afraid. They're thinking they might lose something. But if they truly believe in the Constitution, then why aren't we moving towards or back to that separation of church and state?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things baked into that, and I could go into detail, but I don't want to.
I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say on this.
Okay. I think that we give it way, way too much power. When we look at the Constitution, we need to realize that this was a document written by people who, as a Christian, you understand people are fallible. And those people lived in a certain time. And so we can expect that the Constitution of the United States is going to reflect the people and the time that it was written in. And so when we say get back to it, I don't want to get back to the United States when it was first founded. That United States had a very limited number of people who could vote and a large number of people who didn't have human rights. And so recognizing that first, I think, is really important. There are so many people. I was watching the investigation around January 6th that's been going on. And there was a representative from Arizona who, with tears in his eyes, was saying that he believes that the Constitution of the United States was God-breathed. I mean, I'm not even a Christian, and I think that's heretical. But the fact is, there are a lot of people who think that it is not just, the best, but that it is ineffable, that it is handed down divinely. And I think when you get to that, we're no longer able to talk to each other. So when you say get back to the Constitution, I don't think that should be our goal.
That's a good point. And you guys frequently mention that there are all sorts of atheists. That when you call someone an atheist, that's just another label. But I would say that the same thing is maybe even more true of Christians. And is if you stood outside a church on any given Sunday morning and you had a list of questions, you would find such a wide variety of answers. But yet at the same time, Christians, because of that comfort zone, will still cling together with some major differences of opinion.
Oh, yeah.
But yet if an atheist or an agnostic stepped in and with those same questions or concerns, would be labeled, here's a heretic. We need to, excise them from our society.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's fair. I mean, I guess it sounds really weird that a Christian would have these feelings.
No,
but
not at all.
The more I hang out with these guys, the more I really sympathize and empathize with the position and the place of atheists and agnostics in our society, that they're really, if anyone is being persecuted, it's not the Christians. The myth of Christian persecution just seems to live on and grow for whatever reason.
Well, to be clear, maybe there is a myth of a Christian persecution in the United States. Mm-hmm. If we go outside of the United States, you would probably agree with me that there are some countries where there is Christian persecution. In the same way that I wouldn't say that there's Muslim persecution necessarily in Muslim countries, but there definitely is here. Sorry, being persecuted by the state.
I would push back on that, but I know what you're saying.
And actually, the thing you're going to push back on is something that I want to ask John.
Mm-hmm.
John, when I was a Christian, first of all, I just want to say you sound like an absolute sweetheart.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you called in.
I think.
Here's kind of what killed me when I was still, considering myself a Christian and figuring myself out. What killed me is there were people in my church who would say, no, John, you're wrong. Because those people who disagree with me, well, they just aren't true Christians, John. Have you heard that? Have you considered or talked to people who've had that mindset? And what do you think about that?
I've heard it. I've heard it, and there's so much hypocrisy in that, because some of the same people that tell me, well, they were never true Christians, are the very ones that want to say, oh, brother, don't you have the assurance of salvation? And I'm like, what does that mean? Oh, that if you die, you're going to go to heaven. But yet they'll turn around if someone has a different opinion and say, oh, they were never really saved after all. And I'm like, man, you guys are trying to have it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Spot on.
But I'm for some reason, I'm taking the Christian apologist route, because I just kind of want to push a little bit more. John, so have you heard of the argument from Hypocrisy? No? Easiest example I can have. My dad was a lifelong smoker, right? Smoked cigarettes every day. And when I turned 18, I started smoking cigarettes. And he looks at me and he's got disappointment in his eyes. And he says, son, those are going to kill you someday. And I looked at him and I thought, because I wasn't going to talk back, but I thought, you goddamn hypocrite. The problem is, him being a hypocrite doesn't make him wrong. It just makes him a hypocrite. And so if somebody is being a hypocrite, it doesn't mean they're wrong. So when you point out the hypocrisy, I absolutely agree. But how can you tell whether or not someone is a true Christian? You know what I mean? I think the example you gave is a really, really good point. But we need a little bit more to investigate. Like, there's still some more meat on the bone. Even if they're hypocrites, are they wrong? And if they are, why? Because being a hypocrite isn't a good enough reason for them to be wrong.
Well, I can give you an example from my own life, because I had a Southern Baptist pastor friend of mine. We were friends for 25 years up until the time Donald Trump was elected, and you can kind of fill in the blanks on that. But
yep.
This was one of the people that would say, oh, brother, don't you have the assurance of salvation? And I asked him one day, I said, if we sat down, and whether it takes 10 minutes, 10 hours, or 10 days, you can ask me any question about my life. There's no question that I wouldn't answer truthfully. Mm-hmm. And after you ask all the questions you want, then will you tell me whether or not I'm going to heaven? And he said, oh, no, brother, I couldn't tell you that. Only God knows that. And I said, then what's the point of you having your job? And he said, oh, it's to preach the gospel. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is a fundamental problem between the argument that the people who are Christians are true Christians who will continue to be saved and go to heaven, and the concept of evangelism at all. And that is one of the core problems with a lot of US Christianity, because they've adopted the Calvinistic viewpoint of a true believer versus somebody who was destined to fall away or wasn't ever really true Christian or whatever. And the Protestant, like, fundamentalist evangelical side of things, which focuses on, well, save as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And when you bring those two together, unless you do exactly what you did, John, and sit someone down and actually make them walk this out with you, there's no winning that argument, because they're going to pick one or the other side, whichever side is going to win them their case. So It is hypocrisy, but it also is illogical, which is where the problem comes in. John, this has been a really good call. I think I just want to say, listen, the reason that church and state separation is an issue right now is, I mean, we could go through, like, oh, well, back during the Red Scare, like, one of the ways that you were able to convince people to turn on their neighbors as communists was to equate communism with atheism and equate the US with Christianity, and that baked in a really intense divide that was inherently political. So all of a sudden now, Christians and atheists are not just different in their beliefs, but different in their politics and their economics and the way that they would want to run the world. And so I think, this is just me hypothesizing as somebody who has done a little bit of research into this, that split really kind of was that first enormous crack in that church-state separation in the minds of the average American. There have always been people who have, like, wanted to get over that wall and take advantage of one or both sides. Mm-hmm. But in the psyche of the average person, especially older generations who were actually there and, like, experiencing that propaganda, it's very easy to convince people that Christians need to be in control of the government or else you get communism. And communism is bad because it's tied to atheism, which is bad. So it becomes this, like, circle of bad logic and associations that a lot of people just kind of adopt as true because it feels right, because they've heard it so much and that's the culture they grew up in.
I don't know. I feel like there's a backstop to that, V. Because I think that if we were to look back at founding fathers, it would be more similar to some radical libertarians who, if you're lucky enough, if you're privileged enough to be self-sustaining, and you just make the assumption that everybody else is as self-sustaining as you, then advocating for that kind of libertarian ideology, I feel like there was not a separation of church and state per se like that. At least it wasn't actively on the minds of founding fathers. I think that it was a humanist perspective with a lot of years in between that established the separation of church and state. In the same way that we add amendments to the United States, right? We add different
No, Thomas Jefferson was the one who used that term.
Coined church and state. You're right, in the Federalist Papers.
Right, because
Never
people
mind.
were actively...
Forget everything that I just said, you guys. I'm absolutely wrong. I don't know where I was wrong. You can let me know in the comments. John, don't listen to me. I'm not having a good day. I'm just an asshole on the internet.
No, there were states that were beginning to enact state religions and choosing a faction of Christianity and persecuting other people in those states that were not that particular flavor of Christian. And that was starting to replicate what people initially left Europe for.
Totally wrong. Totally wrong.
Yep.
I was trying to make a point that, we're getting better and our morals are getting better than the founding fathers. I just used a really, really bad one and made a wrong example. John, thank you for calling in.
Yes, please.
I enjoyed talking to you.
Man, like seriously, before you go, the reason ideologically why people need that separation is because as soon as they do what you do, and decide to go and see what the other people are talking about, and are they really that bad? You start to realize, wait, they're not that bad. Like, oh, maybe we don't have irreconcilable differences at our cores. We're just going about it differently, and maybe they have some good ideas. And the second you get into that headspace, you are no longer controllable in the same way. John, you have liberated yourself And the fact that you're calling in and talking about this is really cool and is going to help other people. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my call. And I hope you guys have a good afternoon.
You too.
Yeah, whether or not John ever stops becoming a Christian, even as a Christian, it just makes you a better person. And I know that you had that like deep, ooh, there's a problem with the Muslim example, but because they don't think that they're true Muslims, because they're not doing it right, you get that kind of persecution. I did want to lean into that, but I totally see the point. And if that was not your point, I want to give you the chance to respond.
No, that was definitely like Shia versus Sunni kind of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
If we had more time, I would have asked, the point that I wanted to make there, and I was taking way too long doing it, is that when someone is self-identifying, gatekeeping is not going to help very much. It's just not. If somebody identifies themselves as a Christian, then okay, you're a Christian. You're not maybe a Christian that I'm used to seeing, but when your response to somebody self-identifying is gatekeeping, you're not actually having a conversation. You're just trying to invalidate them before the conversation can begin. And it's uncomfortable. There are a lot of people who call themselves atheists that I remember when I first really started on this, I'm like, oh, they're not real atheists. Oh, fuck. I guess they are. And there are problems that we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I feel like that goes to the core of, at this show, our tagline, we need to talk, is an understanding that there's a lot more work to do. And application of skepticism just, yeah. Anyway. Oh, okay. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. How was that walk around the block for you? Refreshing?
Felt good. I think I chewed a little too much scenery on that one, but